Hey class, thought it might be helpful to make a series of really short videos introducing the concepts behind classes. So if you're having trouble understanding some of the recent material, I hope you find this useful. So I suggest watching these videos, pausing them to study code and repeating parts as you need, and even trying compiling the code yourself. I'll provide that as well. Make little changes to it yourself in order to get the hang of it. If you have questions about a particular part, then you've now got some code that you can bring to me in office hours or after class, or send to me in an email, and you can ask why something works or why we did what we did. Throughout these videos, I'm going to try to use the same example as we used in class the first day that we introduced classes, but the presentation is going to be a little bit different. So let's say we're trying to write Facebook, and we have a basic C++ file started here that doesn't do anything. And so let's say we want to create a person, and that'll be Mark Zuckerberg. We're creating a string variable, first name, for the first person, and that person's name is going to be Mark. And the last name of the first person is going to be Zuckerberg, and his age is 31 right now. And so if we wanted to print that out to the screen, then we would print out to the screen first name and last name and the age. And if we had a second person, we could do the same sort of thing. We could have what I would say are parallel variables. This first name variable is just for the second person. It's also another person, but it's a totally separate variable, which is kind of confusing that we need a separate first name variable for the second person, a separate last name variable for the second person, a separate age for the second person. It would be nice if we could somehow group all these sorts of things together, but right now we can't. We don't know classes yet, so we have to print out their first name, last name, and age separately and append these numbers to things. It becomes kind of cumbersome, but we can do it. It's possible. So we compile this code, waiting for it to compile, and print it out to the screen. And so we get what we want. But let's introduce the first classes for the first time. Let's say that we want to create a class that represents a single person. Actually, before we do that, let's create a function now to simplify some of this code. I think that'll help us a little bit later on. Instead of typing out first name, last name, and age every time and having to copy and paste this C out, let's create a function print name and age that takes in the string that's the first name, the string that's the last name, and the age, and prints everything out for us. So I'm going to create this function up here that takes in a first name, a last name, and an age, and its behavior is to basically just copy and paste this code here. I'm going to print name, first name, and last name, and oh, copied the wrong thing. I'm going to copy this, paste it up here. I'm going to print the first name, last name, and the age. And now instead of calling the C out every time, I can just use my handy function, print name and age. First name 1, last name 1, and age 1. And for the second person, instead of that long cout statement, I can just call that function again with the appropriate variables. So it works exactly the same as before, does exactly the same thing, but now I think we've got a little bit more convenient syntax for printing the person's name and age to the screen. But still, it's not quite what we want. I'd like to be able to somehow group all this information together so that I don't have to pass 3 separate variables into this function every time. It seems kind of silly to pass 3 totally separate variables. What if I had a lot of information about the person? Not just their name and their age, but more specifically the date that they were born and their favorite color and all the information that Facebook contains. If I wanted to write a function to display all that, then it would be kind of inconvenient to pass all those things as separate pieces of information. I want to somehow group all these pieces of information together into one object. So let's see how we can do that in C++. The solution is to write a class. It is to define a new data type that holds multiple pieces of information at its most basic level. That's what it does. So to do that, I'm going to write class person. I'm going to create a person class. Right now I'm writing what's called the interface of the class. It has a public section. You'll see this in the book, and we're not going to talk about private quite yet. But here's where we're going to declare everything that a person can know about themselves. They're going to have a string first name and a string last name, and they're going to have an integer age. So every person that we can create is going to have separate variables for themselves, first name, last name, and age. So instead of declaring separate string first name 1, last name 1, and age 1 variables, now we're going to create a new person, P1, by calling this funny syntax. We'll explain this in a little bit. And we're going to say that P1's first name is Mark, and P1's last name is Zuckerberg, and P1's age is 31. And we use this dot operator to mean that we're going to take the object on the left, P1, and we're going to get the first name variable out of that object, because that P1 object contains both a first name, a last name, and an age. In order to get those pieces out separately, those separate variables, and assign them, we're going to use this dot operator. So we do the same sort of thing with person 2. I'll just copy and paste some code that I already have written. Turns out you can use a slightly different syntax that you might have seen in your book. You don't even have to write gets person with begin end parentheses, but let's do that for consistency right here. And instead of passing in separate first name 1, last name 1, and age 1, we're just going to pass in person P1. The entire person goes into this function all at once. Of course, we're going to have to change the function in a second in order to do that. So now this function is not going to take in these separate variables. It's just going to take in a person object. I'll say P. And now if we want P's first name, P's last name, we use the dot operator, P's age. So this code should work exactly the same as before. This is a little bit more convenient syntax. Now we just pass a single person object that contains both the first name, the last name, and the age of each of those people. Let's compile it and run it. Indeed, same behavior. So I'm going to sign off of this video right now. I'm going to create another one, and we'll move on to take a look at the next topics, which is going to be member functions.